Yate, my relatives. It's Mark Charles. It is about 12:15, maybe 12:10, and it is Thursday, December 16th. Down to keep working on my second cup of coffee. And before I wanted to begin just to acknowledge, as I always do, that I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Piscataway. It's now known as Washington, D.C., but the Piscataway are the host people of these lands, and I want to thank them for their stewardship of these lands and to state how humbled I am to be living on these lands today. I want to thank people who are joining me so quickly. Thank you, Debbie, for jumping on. Thank you, Pamela, for getting on. It's good to be here. Thank you, Cordero, for joining me, and Phil as well. I really look forward to these times to drink this coffee and talk about some stuff I've been observing in the news. I haven't done a whole lot this week. We've had a lot going on this week, just in our family. I don't know if I mentioned it to people, but about a week and a half ago, I was rear-ended in a traffic accident. It didn't do a whole lot of damage to our car, but it did cause a little bit of damage to our rear bumper. And we drive a Chevy Traverse. We bought it when we lived back on the res. It had high clearance. We could fit our whole family in it. We could take it on the dirt roads. It was all-wheel drive. It was a great car for the res. And it was our only car. And so when we moved here to DC, we obviously took it with us. In the city, the car gets about 15 miles to the gallon. And so we have been debating the entire time we've lived here if we need to get a different car or do something so we get better gas mileage and we don't need such a big car here in the city with parking. And our family, our oldest son is now in college, and so we don't need room for five as much anymore. And so we've been debating back and forth about getting a new car. And as the Traverse has gotten older, it's now almost 11 years old. It's had some mechanical problems, and it's been in a few fender benders over the years. And so decided we didn't want to put a whole lot more money into it, especially mechanically. But we did decide a few months ago when we had our last debate about what to do with it, that we would try to keep it for another year. And then when I got rear-ended and we had to get some more work done on it, thankfully, the person who rear-ended me, his insurance covers it. And so it's not going to come out of our pocket. But we again debated, okay, do we want to continue to put money into this car? And we decided that we probably shouldn't. So we decided instead to use whatever money we get from that fender bender to apply it towards the down payment of a new car, as well as some money that we had saved up and over the past few months. And so we did it. We were expecting to probably get a new car within the next year, but the recent fender bender upped our time scale, and we ended up getting it about a week ago. So we are now driving a Honda Accord hybrid, actually, which we're pretty happy with. We did our research. We've been looking at these cars again for a few months now, as we've been thinking about getting a new car and wanting something that is environmentally friendly. Didn't feel ready to make the full jump to an electric car and couldn't really afford to pay the much higher prices of an electric car. And so we decided to go with a hybrid. The Honda gets about 48 miles to the gallon. And so we're expecting our gas expense to drop by about 2/3, which will save us a few $100s every month, which will also help offset some of the price of the car. So anyway, we've been dealing with that this week and dealing with insurance, but also making sure we got the new car over the weekend. And so just adjusting to that. But I've also been trying to take some more downtime this week. And as always happens, right, whenever I don't get on for a second cup of coffee, I tend to feel like I have to say something really big when I come back. And I've been pondering a lot of stuff. I'm going to share some of it today. All of my thoughts aren't formed on what I've been thinking about, but I did want to jump on and just share a few thoughts, mainly just so I don't want to go too long without having a second cup of coffee and sitting down and enjoying some time with you. So yeah, thanks, Debbie. I'm just looking at some of the comments here. Uh, Thanks. Yeah, we're really excited about the 48 miles per gallon. We're seriously expecting our gas payments to drop by almost $200 a month, which would be really nice. But anyway, what I wanted to talk about today, there's a few things going on in Native news that I just want to make sure we highlight. I'm going to share some of these in the comment section. The first is a story in Native News Online, and that Charles F. Sam III, who is Cayuse and Walla Walla, was sworn in as the National Park Service Director, and he is the first Native American to be sworn in as the National Parks Director. And Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland swore him in. It was either yesterday or this morning. I think it was yesterday. So I'm going to put that link into the comment section. And then the second thing I just want to highlight is many of you have probably seen this. I haven't actually seen it yet. We just found a great special on Hulu that gave us a year's subscription to, I think, the ad service of it. Anyway, but Reservation Dogs, right? This Native produced and written and starring Native actors. This series on Hulu called Reservation Dogs has been nominated for for a Golden Globe Award. And like I said, we just signed up for Hulu the other day because of a special that we found over the Christmas season that let us get it fairly cheap. So I have not seen Reservation Dogs yet, but I've heard great things about it. And I just wanted to highlight for people that it's thrilling that this show coming out of Indian country and about reservation life is actually doing so well. So I wanted to share those two things with you and just highlight a few things going on around Indian country. The stuff I've been pondering about more deeply, right? There's obviously we have the series of tornadoes that went through the Midwest, and with, I think it's 84 people have died, most of them in Kentucky. For those of you who don't know, my vice presidential candidate from the 2020 election lives in Kentucky. And so I've been following the news there very closely about what's been happening there. But right, we had these horrible tornadoes that went through and just caused havoc, literally destroyed entire sections of whole towns. And of course, this is a very late in the year for the Midwest to be getting hurricanes, or not hurricanes, sorry, to be getting tornadoes. And as there's this massive storm kind of coming across the country that has caused a lot of rain and significant snowfall in California and other parts of the Southwest and the West, is now causing very high winds going through the Midwest. And of course, this looks like it is absolutely caused by climate change. And it's just been devastating to see the destruction that has been left in its wake throughout the Midwest. And they're even expecting more high winds. I think I saw in Minneapolis today, or in Minnesota, they're expecting higher winds. And the whole Midwest is, I don't call it a heat wave, but, temperatures in the 40s and 50s, which especially for places like Minnesota in December is almost unheard of. And so again, it's very clear that our climate change is having a very severe impact on the weather that we're observing and the damage that it's causing in real time. And so I've been thinking about some of these things, and I saw that yesterday President Biden traveled to Kentucky, and he visited on the ground. And the areas where he visited and the areas that were hard hit were very much very Republican-centered states, with people not only who supported President Trump, but many who also were at the December 6th uprising, terrorist attack here in Washington, D.C., to try and keep Trump in office. And I was grateful to see President Biden reaffirm for people that this is not a partisan issue. This is not he said there's not red tornadoes and blue tornadoes. These are natural disasters, and these are the things that bring us together as a country, and we have to reach across party lines in order to be one in these types of tragedies. And there was an article in the Washington Post this morning that that talked about that issue specifically, and how both President Biden as well as the people on the ground were at least willing to cautiously lay down their partisanship so that we could come together as humans and address this natural disaster that happened in Kentucky. And I was grateful to see that. There's also been stories, and this is a story from ABC News, where Senator Rand Paul, and obviously he's a senator from Kentucky, and immediately after this tornadoes went through, he posted some letters that he sent to the White House requesting immediate aid, which was wholly appropriate, right? Because this was his community that had been hit. This is the state that he's the senator from. And he was requesting immediate and large federal aid for his state that had received the brunt of these tornadoes that went through. However, his requests rang very hollow. And it's because Rand Paul is a deficit hawk. And as other disasters have hit other areas of the country, especially more liberal areas like the Pacific North or the Atlantic Northeast, Rand Paul has said that before we can give aid to these communities, we have to first offset that cost by cutting other things from the budget. And he's done this numerous times, especially when the stories that were most highlighted was when these natural disasters or these climate disasters hit either communities of color or hit liberal areas. And so his immediate request for substantial aid without mentioning the need to offset it in our budget, in our nation's budget, rang very hypocritical and hollow by a lot of people because of the way that he's treated other people when they have faced similar disasters and have needed the aid of our federal government. And yet he has been less inclined to help provide that immediately because of his belief of we have to control the deficit. And so when he didn't mention that in his request, the hypocrisy came through very, very clearly. The third story I want to mention here, and I'm going to tie all of these together, is an article I read yesterday in the Alantic. And this article was written by a conservative columnist named Matthew Walther, and it's titled "Where I Live, No One Cares About COVID." And he is a part of the Catholic Church and writes for different conservative online and for conservative publications. And when I read the article yesterday, I found it fascinating. He says he's from a rural part of Michigan, northern Michigan, and basically his community where he lives doesn't act like COVID exists. And not only that, but then he begins very intentionally to speak condescendingly towards places like New York and Washington, D.C. and Los Angeles, communities that are taking COVID very seriously, and begins to talk in condescending ways towards these communities and labeling us, and I'm going to say us because I live in Washington, D.C., as kind of just these liberal elitists, who are just trying to trample the rights of people all across the country. And I shared these three together, right? Because there's something in here, and I haven't quite pieced it all together yet. And I'm going to come back on and do another second cup of coffee later when I kind of made the connections a bit more fully. But there's something in here where I think, again, understanding that the right is explicitly racist and sexist and white supremacist, and the left is implicitly racist and sexist and white supremacist, and both sides believe in this notion of American exceptionalism, which is rooted in the lie of white supremacy. And the problem with this notion, this myth of American exceptionalism, when coupled with the hyper individualism of Western culture and American society, is that when you specifically, individually, are impacted by something, then the government needs to work to serve you and to help you and to make sure that your life is not more disrupted than necessary. But when the lives of other people are disrupted by very similar events, this is where, well, they're the other, they're not like me, they don't live around me, and therefore it's not something we have to take as seriously. And so when we couple the myth of American exceptionalism, again, which is rooted in the lie of white supremacy, and we combine it with the hyper individualism of Western European / American culture, right? We get these spaces where we as a nation, as well as we as individuals, believe that, yeah, when something happens to us individually, the government needs to serve us and help us. But when it's happening to other people who don't align with me politically, people who don't look like me, people who so on and so forth, then we don't have to take it as seriously. And as I read, especially the article in the Alantic by Matthew Walther, I was really struck, right? Because I mean, I grew up in white evangelicalism. I've worked in Western Michigan as a consultant for the Christian Reformed Church for almost a decade and a half. I preached in these churches. I know this mindset. And part of the issue with this white evangelicalism, especially in Michigan, is that your entire goal is to live in a bubble, right? Where you go to your Christian school and you live in your Christian neighborhood and you have your Christian neighbors and you have all these people who look like you. And sure, you may give charity to the outside, you may send pictures to the outside, you may do mission trips out there, but you have this bubble where you are absolutely safe and protected and everyone is like you and you just live in this environment. And when you live in that bubble, right? So I'm sure this man's community in rural Michigan is that very, he even mentioned his kids are homeschooled, and and so he lives in this bubble. And yes, maybe in your community you don't see the immediate effects of COVID going through. Maybe you are able to live with your guard down a little bit less because of how remote and how rural your area is, and how so on and so forth. But then to condescendingly look at communities like New York, like Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, that not only have very large populations of people living not spaced out, but very close together, as well as the fact that these three places that he singled out in his in his op-ed are not only highly concentrated, dense populations, but they're gathering places. They're hubs of not only national but international travel, with people coming in and out all the time. So obviously, we need to be hyper vigilant in these spaces where you have so many people coming from so many directions at so many times, and you have to be vigilant about wearing masks and social distancing because the risk is so much greater. And I'm certain, right, just like Rand Paul, if Matthew's community was struck by COVID going through it, and many high number of his neighbors died due to this pandemic, I'm positive his tone would change in an instant. I'm positive of it. But because he lives in his bubble, because it doesn't affect him, because he feels like he's threatened by people who are outside and therefore different from him, he writes this incredibly condescending op-ed in the Atlantic and blasts spaces that need to be much more vigilant because of the reality of life in those places. And let's not live in this imaginary world that just because you're rural, you're somehow protected, right? I mean, the Navajo Nation, where I lived for 11 years, has had some of the highest rates of COVID infection, especially early on in this pandemic. Places where it's not easy to get to the hospital, places where it's hard to not only control these types of health crises, but for even people to trust the government because of the history of what's happened there. And so, yeah, I found these 3 articles very interesting, and I'm continuing to ponder and put some thought into them of what does it mean for us as a nation, right? I don't want to just dismiss people like Matthew Walther, and I don't want to mock or be condescending back to him and people like him. The same with Rand Paul and others, right? And it's really striking that Americans voted to increase the debt ceiling. They wanted to make sure, they knew it could get increased by the Democrats and Democrats alone, and they wanted to make sure that only the Democrats voted to increase the debt ceiling. And now they are requesting aid for their state, which needs the aid because it had this horrible tragedy happen to it. But they didn't lift a finger to help that get raised. So the third article I want to, or the fourth article I want to post here, and again, these are all my thoughts that are right now just kind of jumble rolling around in my head, was this article in the Washington Post about how GOP candidates are flocking to Mar-a-Lago to pay Trump for the privilege of hosting their events. And it pointed out how Mar-a-Lago has seen its business increase exponentially because Trump obviously lives there. And this has become the place to go for Republican candidates at both the state and national level to hold fundraisers with the hope of getting Trump to not only appear at their events, but also to endorse them. And obviously, Trump is profiting hugely from not only him being able to own this business, but because he lives there and he can show up at these events, he's making money hand over foot based well, for the Republic, and so he's making an incredible amount of money for his personal self, for himself, based on his role in the leadership of the GOP. He's really monetizing his supporters and finding ways to use their support and their belief in him to exorbitantly line his own pockets with a tremendous amount of money. And the reason I'm ending with this article is because he has had an impact not only on the Republican Party, but on politics in America. And there are so many people who blindly follow Trump. And somehow we need to reach these people, right? Without just demonizing all of them, but to help them understand that Trump, A, he's not a Republican. B, I highly doubt he has, I deeply, deeply question his claims of a personal faith, at least in any God that he claims is Christian. And most of the people who support him from white evangelicalism 10 years ago hated him. And it's not that Trump has changed in the past 10 years, gotten more powerful, and the white evangelical church is absolutely in bed with power. And so anyway, the issue going on here is going into not only the midterm elections in 2022, but especially if Donald Trump runs again in 2024. There needs to be a way not to necessarily silence Donald Trump or to I think so many people try to, especially, and this happened in both 2016 and 2020, where the Democratic challengers to Trump in those elections tried to play Trump's game and tried to have the better comeback, to kind of publicly shame him. And that's not the way to beat him. That's not the way to beat a narcissist, right? Instead, you have to learn how to speak to his audience and persuade his audience, or at least help them understand that what they're supporting is not what they claim to believe, or at least maybe help them acknowledge this is probably what you do believe if you continue to support this. And so anyway, the thing I've just been pondering deeply is going into the midterm elections and then going into the 2024 presidential election. How does this message that he's bringing, which is hyper-partisan, explicitly racist and sexist and white supremacist, and he's radically changing, well, I don't know if he's changing, but he's having an impact on the political landscape of the country. And what is going to be the best way to counter that? And I don't have the answer to that yet. I don't have the answer to that, but it's something I'm thinking about deeply as I'm watching what he's doing and what both parties are doing. And while I appreciate Joe Biden's, right, his attempts to try and work across the aisle, the problem is he's not willing to address the things that need to be addressed, right? he's not willing to stand up for the things he really believes in because he's working so hard to work across the aisle. And I mean, we see this even with climate change, right? He talks about how we need to address climate change and how this is so important. And so now when gas prices go up due to inflation, rather than using that as, okay, let's use this to invest in other things, and he instead does a lot of work to lower the price of gas. And that's just one example. And so the way the Democratic Party is addressing the horrific rhetoric that's coming out of the Republican Party is not the solution. Joe Biden does not have the solution to the vileness of Donald Trump and what the majority of the Republican Party is becoming. I'm very interested to see how Liz Cheney is positioning herself, because she is basically, I think, trying to say, I am the leader of people who truly believe in Republican values, not people who've drank in Donald Trump's Kool-Aid. And I think the way she's conducting herself in the commission that's looking at the January 6th terrorist attack, I think she is trying to position herself as the leader of the GOP that hasn't drank the Kool-Aid yet. And I see her as much more reasonable than any, whether it's Donald Trump or Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell or anyone else. Like, they've all drank the Kool-Aid and they've decided that they're going to ride Trump's coattails as long as they can, damn the rest of their party, right? They're so in love with that power. And Liz Cheney seems to be taking a different route. So I'm very interested in what she's going to be doing moving forward. But anyway, so these are just, there's been a lot of things I've been pondering. And December is always a time of deep pondering for me. For those of you who don't know, right, there's a lot of things going on in December. Obviously, at the end of November, we had the massacre at Sand Creek anniversary on November 29th. Later in December, we have the hanging of the Dakota 38. And also this Sunday, and I'm going to share this story right now. This Sunday is it was on December 19th, 2009, when Congress passed and President Obama signed House Resolution 3326, which was the Department of Defense Appropriations bill that included the buried apology to Native peoples. This was the apology that I hosted an event on December 19th of 2012 in front of the Capitol building. We read the apology out loud and we tried to bring it to a national attention. And there was really only one national outlet that did any sort of story on this, and that was CNN. I've actually shared that story in the comments right now. And that date, November 19th or December 19th, is coming up this Sunday. And so I'm going to do something this Sunday. I'm not quite sure what yet, but I'm going to do something. But so I'm pondering all these things because December is actually a pretty horrific month regarding our nation's history towards Native Americans. There's a lot of very disheartening anniversaries and dates of genocides that took place in the month of December. And so I'm always thinking about things much more deeply during this month. And so I will be doing something this Sunday. I'm not quite sure what yet. I'll probably read the apology online and try to foster some sort of discussion about it. But yeah, that will be coming up. And then the last thing I just want to share is, once again, if you're interested in purchasing a signed copy of my book, Unsettling Truth, we actually have a special going on where you can get it wrapped for free. So if you select you want this gift wrap, you can actually send it as a Christmas present to someone. And I've actually think that's a very good way to kind of expose people who you may have a harder time talking directly with them about the doctrine of discovery. But if you send them the book or they read the book and you have a chance to have a discussion with them about it, I've always found it's better to expose people through kind of a third party, whether it's a video or a book or something that they can kind of digest at a slower pace. and then to come back and have discussion about it. So anyway, we have this on our website, where if you do want to send it as a gift this Christmas, you can send a signed copy of Unsettling Truths. Anyway, those are my thoughts. This was a very kind of bit of a meandering second cup of coffee, but I've appreciated a chance to kind of sit with you and talk with you about these things for a few moments. And I hope you have a great rest of the week. And if I'm not on tomorrow or Saturday, I will definitely do some sort of live stream on Sunday, which will be December 19th, which is the date that the apology to Native peoples was buried in the appropriations bill. So I haven't decided how public I'm going to do something yet, but I'm definitely going to be doing something online. Anyway, I hope you all have a great day. My relatives. Walk in beauty, and may we learn how to walk in beauty together. Hakone.